A further statement on the title of a very short essay, which is either The Return of the Stray or Return of the Stray, making no particular difference between that distinction. Um, so, on this theme of the Gnosticism implied by the idea of the stray, we can understand also a link to Dugin's emphasis on Neoplatonism and especially the notion of the demiurge, because it's exactly this demiurge as the Platonic agathon or the good. And remember, we were just saying from the good, the main lines of assay or of egress, no, scratch that. The main lines of building up of it, of knowledge of the good, of let's say an aletheia or truth about the good, where what we would be deprived is all obscurity, all leth or all oblivion with regard to the good, so that eventually we'd get to the point where there would be no more truth would be possible. The lines that describe the extreme cases from out of which any other view would take its orientation, or the either pleasure or knowledge. So either and pleasure probably at least so pleasure historically seems to be a reaction to the knowledge view with the Epicureans. So a reaction to Socrates, Plato. But whether that's ultimately decisive, the empirical historical coming later of Epicureanism, we don't know. Let's not go into that now. So since we're going back behind either the pleasure or the knowledge view, because both would be linked to claims about the good and claims about what let's call it the active intellect, or that which is in the place of Socrates being able to stand back with his daimon, allowing some overlap between Socrates' daimon and the active intellect as the higher part of nous, which may or may not be properly part of the suke or soul. Going away from that position, the Gnostic position says we have to kill this so-called good or agathon, or what becomes visible as the demiurge in Plotinus, or in the Neoplatonists in general. We have to go. How did they say? Beyond the inner penetralium or sanctum sanctorum, we must leave the temple images behind, and then we're already exposed to this. Again, to quote Strauss's formula, this radically mysterious dispensation of fate. This is what in this Gnostic version of of Heidegger, this is what we're exposing ourselves to then when we leave behind philosophy for history, let's say, for a faith in history, as Heidegger puts it in one of his early works as a presupposition of his thinking. And this, at the same time, in coming into conformity with Dugin, at least in one point in Dugin's Neoplatonistic commitments, we at the same time orient ourselves as against Zizek, which means we positively regard Zizek as an authority for us, but we're using him as the negative side of the authority. And that will come in the first line of the essay, in where Zizek is bringing in his split between blind nature and the human being. So I wanted to make a clarification, because we have to clarify this title also with respect to, I've been talking about the types of leisure and the leisure associated with philosophy or mathematics of the Egyptian priests, and leisure or school, the two. So you can see these words, which are contemporary vernacular words, bring us into a lot of ambiguity in regard to this subject, where we only get a little bit of orientation from pointing to the actual history that mathematics developed under specific conditions for the being we're calling the human being. And then when we understand it as Dasein, what are the specific conditions to unlock Dasein? It would be one possible starting point. But we want to bring in a theory of personality into this question too. How does personality move here? And what's the relationship between personality and being? Which then we'll have to show how personality links to Plato's ideas. We've talked about that a little in the past with regard to the Youth of Fro, where the theoi are emphasized and the ideas are abstracted from in Plato's art of his dialogues. He constructs his dialogues according to a choice of including, or at least this is one way to regard the way Plato operates, including some things deliberately, excluding other things deliberately, thereby showing an emphasis. And under the assumption that Plato wants to bring us into the light of the ideas and therefore ultimately to the highest idea of the good, and to exclude the theoi, the gods, and then therefore also personality. This is again part of the straying. So possibly we want to go back towards a greater understanding of personality, which is hugely misunderstood subject matter. So for instance, I was again listening to some of this Jordan Peterson material. So I grow to despise more and more the more I listen to him, but it's also, there's the foil in him in that he is so committed to the current views of the university and to the juxtaposition of descriptive sciences. And in fact, he seems to use the word spirituality, so far as I can derive a meaning from his usage, basically as identical to subjectivity, so-called. So that spirituality means something set in contradistinction to the practices of the hard sciences, and especially the sciences as they converge with a kind of behavioralism. Which, just in a note, I'll say what spiritus meant for the scholastics was intellectus. Spiritus and intellectus were identical. And intellectus is that which receives the immediate datum, and it corresponds to the beginning point for ratiocination, which we were talking about before, in contradistinction to the work of a Winckelmann, or somebody who's not trying to make discursive arguments which hold together in some kind of rule set, like the Socratic rules or like the rules of thought in Aristotle, First Philosophy. So I said something which I should have been more guarded about, which is I gave the example of the contradistinction between the small personality of Bob Dylan and then the fuller human personality of Stockhausen or Bach. But that's radically misleading, because the problem is then the notion crops up, and Peterson used this phrase, some people have a bias towards classical music or a bias towards Bach and the like. This is so what I want to say is it could have been, to avoid that, let's say we could have had somebody else like Woody Guthrie, or somebody, say he was still alive, somebody who on a higher level had done folk song, had done any other form of music, or a troubadour or something else. The point wasn't the genre of the music, but it was the, let's say on an analogy with poetry, a real poet, there should be knowledge. We could call it wisdom also, but wisdom, emphasizing that it's not just about some technical matter, but knowledge about life should be in the matter. Whereas um, even without a direct apprehension of personality, you can see in Bob Dylan, he's just producing lines that sound interesting and correspond probably to some of his um, uh, vagabond experiences, or whatever you want to call them, his adventures as a young man in New York and in other places. And they're basically not particularly interesting. They're just something that young people would be find exciting, maybe, I suppose. But they have no real knowledge in the sense that Shakespeare produces real knowledge about human life, in the sense that the real poets produced actual wisdom or knowledge. In the same sense, we would want a folk song that has actual wisdom or knowledge, or any other genre of music that has actual wisdom or knowledge. That would be a sign that we're dealing with a large personality. It wouldn't in itself be the direct apprehension of the being of that personality as personality. I'm going to say on this score, we could then even see, I think I'm almost out of time, but okay, let's leave it at that for the moment. But we have to go, that's totally decisive whether we understand personality directly the way it's meant to be understood, in a way Carl Jung is the closest one to the way I'm talking about it, in the way the Greeks um, had some apprehension to it. Then we have to talk about personality in terms of the way it's received in Christian doctrine, which is a crucial and a vast theme. Uh, but we cannot misunderstand it in this way of saying, oh, you're saying it's larger personality because those are the cultural forms, such as classical music, which are regarded as high culture or gentry culture or whatever you want to call it. It's not about that.